Hi family, it's African Esquire here with a new video. This past week I got the amazing experience to go to Africa for the first time. I got to go to Ghana, that's where my husband's from, and so we got to go and tour the land and I got to see the motherland for the first time. The trip was amazing. I really recommend all African descendants, all African people throughout the diaspora, that you really make it over to Africa at some point. It's an expensive trip, and I understand that, it's definitely a commitment to make. It's definitely a lot of money out of your pocket, but it's so much more worth it than I see people, African people all the time in America going to Europe or going to Latin America, and there's nothing wrong with going to those places, but for me, like I've always said, next time I'm leaving anywhere, I have to go back to the motherland. So this is actually my first vacation in a long time, just because it was so expensive, and saving up and just having enough to actually experience the land of my origin, the last place that my ancestors got to see, the place where they were born before they were shipped out into this place called America. Just getting to experience that and feel them and feel their spirit and feel the love in the continent. I just recommend it to everyone just to see it at some point in your life. So I'm just going to make a couple of observations that I made while I was in Africa. And these are things that might have been misconstrued from my point of view prior to going to the motherland. But after seeing this, I completely understand what is going on as far as different dynamics with African people. The first that I wanted to note, I now understand why so many Africans leave Africa. Prior to this trip, I'm not going to say I thought that all Africans were sellouts for leaving the motherland, but I kind of did feel like in the back of my head, why would you want to leave this place to go to another country, enjoy the spoils of Africa? I mean, if you understand America and Europe, all of their riches are literally the spoils of our ancestry. So I always felt like, well, why would you want to leave? Why not change the continent? Why not try to start a revolutionary movement? And I understand it better, and that is that when you go to, at least in Ghana, and my understanding is the same in a lot of African countries, if not all, the Black people, the African people, are just economically starved. I mean, the jobs there's no jobs. There's a lot of businesses, and this is something that kind of messes with my philosophy a little bit, because a lot of the philosophy that I've held up until now was that, well, all we need is businesses, but that's not necessarily the case, because if the whole economic system is depleted for your people, having businesses is not necessarily going to uplift you. You have to have some capital built into that that infrastructure of having businesses inside of your community. So if you don't have the capital there, then it's going to be very difficult. Now, there's been times where we were able to gather the capital and to work harder and do so, but just understanding that there's a whole lot of Black businesses in Africa, Black-owned stores, if you go on the streets, people selling you different things, just Black-owned, Black-owned, Black-owned. The things that aren't Black-owned are the financial institutions, the major players, the ones that really bring the capital in. So that kind of challenges my thinking as far as, is it so much that African people in America or throughout the diaspora that we need Black businesses, or we need specific Black businesses? That we don't just need a Black corner store or a Black restaurant, but we actually need a Black business that's going to pump the revenue and keep it into our community. Because the big businesses, the banks, the big institutions in Africa that aren't controlled by our people, those are the ones that pump the revenue out of Africa. So understanding that it's not necessarily just a business thing, that was a big revelation for me. But I also really got to understand that a lot of Africans that leave Africa love Africa. They don't want to leave. And I was just watching a video with a Professor Lumumba. I posted it on a couple of my pages, but he was talking about how if you, with the Ghana president that I will be posting today. he was talking about how if you look at the major migration patterns throughout history, yes, there was a big migration of people leaving Africa and trying to get to America or trying to get to Europe. But prior to that, if you think about the Irish migration and the Italian migration, you had a lot of people in these countries trying to get over to America. And the reason was not because they didn't love being Irish, not because they didn't love being Italian. It was because of economic incentive. They were going to starve out if they stayed in their home country. And when I see what's going on in Africa, there's a lot of hardworking people, a lot of able-bodied people who are willing to do anything to lift themselves out of poverty, but the infrastructure just isn't there. Because as we know, the West is raping Africa of its resources. And so we have all the jobs, right? And because this is America and this is one of the countries that has stolen the capital from those countries and put it into their system, and therefore we are able to have jobs. So understanding that, and I said this in a previous video, all of us are slaves in this system, and that we are literally dependent on this system to provide us with any type of economic livelihood. If you have to get a job or else you will starve, you are basically dependent on this system's way of conducting itself in order to survive. And so a lot of Africans come here not because they want to, but because they have no choice. They have no economic base at home, but they love their country. It's not about their country. It's not some, definitely I think are crazy infatuated with European culture. Most love their culture, would rather stay in their own country, but the economics is not there. So that's a big misconception. Don't think that they're running away from their blackness. They're actually trying to find a way to survive. And we have to find the same way to survive, unfortunately, until we find a better system or create a better system wherein we don't necessarily depend on these institutions to employ us. So here's another observation I made. This is so interesting to me. So I went to Kwame Nkrumah's memorial, also went to the Black Star Square, and the home of W.E.B. Du Bois. If you don't know, W.E.B. Du Bois died in Ghana. He was brought to Ghana by President Nkrumah to do a project. I believe it was an encyclopedia of African countries. And I think he was like 92 when he got there. When he got there, the United States government, who was not a fan of him at this point in his life, because this is when W.E.B. Du Bois was not this is not the Souls of Black Folks, W.E.B. Du Bois. This is the Pan-Africanist radical W.E.B. Du Bois. So the United States government canceled his passport. So he's basically stuck in Ghana, but he becomes a Ghana citizen and lives there and dies there a few years later. So seeing all these different significant sites inside of the Pan-African diaspora, inside of the struggle for freedom, it surprises me how little Africans know about Pan-Africanism. I think everyone gets the general concept. Oh, Africans, we must unite. Africans, we must care for Africa. We need to not depend on other people. Most people understand that, but I don't think most people understand the radical ideology of Nkrumah. Even some of the people with me, they were saying how, oh yeah, well, we've seen the Nkrumah memorial in our city, but we never visited it. And so I've learned a lot about him, but I'm like, this is your history, and that's one thing that I will say with Africans in America. We're almost infatuated with the past. We're almost infatuated with learning about Malcolm, learning about Martin. But in Africa, because of the colonial education system, people are almost made to ignore the significant ideological contributions of Africans to the freedom struggle. And this is very, very, very essential to the maintenance of white supremacy. If Africans, and this is something we have to understand, if Africans wake up to what is going on, if they really wake up to the fact that this involves me, it's not like beyond me, this is me too. If they wake up to those things, then it's like literally over for this way that this system works. If all the people said, no, we're not going to take this anymore, that would literally change the entire discourse of history. So it's very intentional. It's nothing to look down on our African, continental Africans for, but it's to understand that this is something that's intentional, and that if we're going to move forward as a people internationally, we really do have to work to get this information out. Not just be okay with educating. We definitely have to educate wherever we are. We have to educate our children, but also just get the information out to different places throughout the diaspora about people like Nkrumah, Sankara, Lumumba, about people like Malcolm, about Marcus Garvey, about Haile Selassie, all the philosophies of these people. Our philosophy, our ideological history is so rich and so potent. If all of us actually just learned it, I mean, it would just change the way things go. And so understand that there are people who are actively working against us to keep us from learning these things. When you look at the way the media is today, you see all these like rappers that just, you know, don't look like they have any mental capacity. They literally mumble rap or whatever. They dress like whatever. They do things that are intentionally trying to make you think this is your reality. This is an intentional distraction. We have to understand that this system is very aware of the fact that, number one, things are kind of coming to a head right now economically. You have the West fighting with China over the resources of Africa, and Africa is taking it. So rather than have Africans wake up to the fact that they are being victimized and have a right and a ability to correct it, they would rather have you thinking about little Yachi, or arguing about, Kanye West, arguing about these things that really don't change your liberation. And that's one thing I'm really going to work on doing, is not getting into these little social media spats. I understand that it's probably not going to draw as many views, but for the people who do watch and pay attention to things that I do have to say, I would rather not engage inside of this reactionary squabble, because we have to understand that if anytime that our political movement is determined on what white people do, or what other people, raccoons, whatever you want to call them, do, anytime that we're dependent on that in order to have a reaction, then you're never going to be revolutionary. So the fact that so many people want to protest, but only when white people do something first, that makes your action not revolutionary. Your action is reactionary. Your mindset should be that before they even get to that point where they're going to do something to us, we're going to have a plan and a strategy in order to attack this thing called racism. Because realistically, we know that even after this Starbucks incident, even after whatever incident you want to talk about, there's going to be another one in the future. So why not start planning now for the one that we know is going to happen in the future? Let's see. The other thing I just wanted to talk about, just a second. I've heard this interesting argument about Pan-Africanism with Africans kind of downplaying whether or not it's actually something that Africans push or whether they're for, because historically a lot of the Pan-Africanist figures were kind of from people outside of Africa who are in the diaspora. And today, a lot more people who rep that seem to be from the diaspora rather than the continent. But I just wanted to remind people, when Marcus Garvey was putting out information, when he created the UNIA, there was no UNIA in Africa. And the reason why is because there was a conscious and deliberate decision to block the African people from getting Marcus Garvey's information. Because if you think about it, I mean, what Marcus Garvey was saying, Africa for Africans, free Africa, liberate our homeland, build Africa. We're going to develop our own society. We're going to, we're not even going to try to integrate into the system. We're going to create our own, and we're not going to be dependent on anyone else for help. We're going to be self-sustaining. If the Africans, back when Garvey was doing his work, were aware of this, this could have completely changed what was going on as far as colonialism. So they were very intentional that they literally banned the writings of I forget the newspaper, but the Black Star, they had a newspaper. They literally banned this information from Africa. So understand that our big agenda has to be to spread information to our African brothers and sisters. If we're not doing this, then we are essentially letting the status quo be maintained. Because if we're not aware of what's going on, then there's no way we can change it. And this goes for us in the diaspora, this goes for us on the continent, that goes for us everywhere. We have to be in a real avid mode as far as spreading information and understanding again that there are people who are intentionally throwing things out there, intentionally trying to distract me and you from talking about what's going on as far as this system. I've seen so many more people talk about Kanye West than I heard talk about the U.S. Base in Ghana. I heard so many people talk about anything you want to talk about. And so many people talk about who bit Beyonce rather than talking about the slave trade going on in Libya, rather than talking about the ousting of Mugabe in Zimbabwe. Like so many things that we're not talking about. Understand that if you engage in these conversations and use your platforms for that, you are doing what they want you to do. So just so that you're aware and that you're actually being played, and we think that we're being independently minded, but if what you're doing is not affecting the system of white supremacy, then you are just being played as far as being used to distract our people and distract yourself from understanding what is really going on in this world. This is just another minor point. Something I noticed about Africa is, even though it's so poor, and even though there's so many people who are struggling, the love of brother and sister is still present. There's still a lot, you could feel kind of safe there, even when you're walking through somewhere where people are way more poor than we've been in America. Poorer than the projects, but you can walk through those places and not feel threatened. And this is just something to say that there is hope for our people. We do not have to be relegated to these conditions. We do not have to be this nigger. We don't have to become that. We have to understand that this is a creation of America, a nigger. That's a creation of white supremacy. But we have an opportunity and an ability to be who we are, and that is African people with dignity, love, and self-respect. So that's all I'm going to say on this for today. I'm sure in the future videos I will reflect more on different things that I did notice, but I just wanted to make those quick observations. So I will see you all in another video.